Remind folks that we're conducting this meeting by electronic means as permitted by the open meeting law. Because of extraordinary circumstances, this meeting will be conducted by WebEx and will be recorded. Members of the public will be able to monitor this meeting by either calling the number and the passcode listed on the agenda posted at the Met Council website, or by clicking the link on the agenda to view the live stream of the meeting. So with that, Michelle, I will ask you to call roll, please, to establish quorum.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Musse. Vento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michelle. We have a quorum of the committee, and we will move on with the agenda. The next item is approval of the agenda. So if no one has any changes or comments to make about the agenda, we'll consider it approved. Are there any proposed changes? Hearing none, the agenda is approved, and we will move on to our next agenda item, which is the approval of the minutes, and I would entertain a motion to approve, please.
Vento moves approval.
Second by Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, council members. Any discussion, additions, corrections to the minutes? Any discussion? Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion to approve the minutes.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And just to let committee members know, Councilmember Musse did reach out earlier today and had concerns about his ability to make this meeting. So he may not be joining us as we go forward. Great. Moving along the community established agenda, on to our business items. Our first of three business items is item 2020-257. It's the City of Forest Lake 2040 Comprehensive Plan Amendment. And Mr. Brenner, Jerome Brenner, will present. Welcome, Mr. Brenner.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Chair, council members. My name is Jerome Brenner II, Senior Planner and Local Planning Assistant, here to present to you the Comprehensive Plan Amendment for Minnesota Lake Storage Facility in the City of Forest Lake. I'd like to mention that Donovan Hart, the city's zoning administrator, is here in the audience, with whom we've been collaborating with throughout this process. Next slide, please. As shown in Figure 1 of your staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the City of Forest Lake as an emerging suburban edge and diversified rural community. The area affected by the amendment is shown here in red along the western edge of the city, located in the emerging suburban edge area. Next slide, please. As shown here in Figure 2 of your staff report, this map shows the regional systems in relation to the amendment site. It includes Interstate 35 just to the east of the site, as I mentioned, in the northwestern edge of the city, and there are no existing or planned regional park units in the vicinity of the site. Next slide, please. Council members, the amendment proposes to re-guide 15 acres of high-density residential to highway commercial to accommodate a 324-unit self-storage facility. This property is located at the western edge of the city at 4470 220th Street. Next slide, please. Oh, here we are. My apologies. Here it looks like there's coming through here. Okay, Next slide, please. Councilmembers, here we have the existing and proposed land uses. On the left side of the map, we have the current future land use map shown here in red. Just a clarification, the reds are just a slight off. It may reflect the general business, but it is the more brick red shown in the highway commercial and is the proposed future land use. Excuse me, this is reversed here. The highway commercial will be the proposed future land use, and the current future land use is the high density shown on the right. Next slide, please. Table 1 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the city. The change that has resulted in this amendment is underlined here in Table 1 under the high density residential land use category. The amendment results in a slight decrease in the overall density of the city from 3.2 to 3.1 units per acre. As mentioned, council members, this site is located in the emerging suburban edge portion of the city, which is expected to plan for overall minimum densities of 3 to 5 units per acre. The city of Forest Lake continues to be consistent with Thrive's land use policies. Figure 4 shown here in your staff report illustrates the land guided for affordable housing in the city. The proposed amendment decreases the city's inventory of land guided to support the development of low and moderate income housing. The city's share of the region's 2021 to 2030 need for affordable housing is 648 units. To address this need, the city needs to increase the minimum units possible by 225 units. This can be accomplished by guiding enough residential acres with sufficient minimum densities. And council staff continue to work with the city on options available to accomplish this. The proposed amendment is inconsistent with the council's 2040 housing policy plan, and the city is therefore ineligible to participate in Livable Communities Act programs of which they are currently enrolled. Next slide, please. Staff find that the proposed amendment conforms to the regional system plans. The amendment is inconsistent with the 2040 housing policy, but is consistent with other council policies and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Council members, the proposed actions before you today are that the Met Council authorize the city of Forest Lake to place its comprehensive plan amendment into effect, find that the amendment does not change the city's forecast. Number 3, find that the amendment renders the city's comprehensive plan inconsistent with the council's housing policy, and that the city is therefore ineligible to participate in Livable Communities Act programs. And to the 4th one, please. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. The 4th one's on the following slide. Thank you. And then the 4th one, to advise the city to that it be consistent with the council housing policy, that the city needs to increase the inventory of land guided to support the development of low and moderate income housing for the 2021-2030 decade by at least 225 units by guiding enough residential acres with sufficient minimum densities. And lastly, to implement the advisory comments and the review record for land use, water supply, and natural resources. And council members, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilmember Chambliss has her hand up.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a question on the response on them being inconsistent with council policy. Has it been done in the past that when the situation occurs that they're inconsistent as far as not having enough housing for the city to provide a response to the council?
Mr. Chair, council members, Councilmember Chambliss, in my experience, I haven't seen that before, but it's possible that my Director Barajas can answer your question there.
Mr. Chair, council members.
Please.
I'm
Yep.
Lisa Rajas, Community Development Director. I'm sorry, Councilmember Chambliss, you asked, I want to make sure I understand your question. You asked whether it was customary for a community to provide a response. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, once the council deems that the city's comprehensive plan is has a portion that's inconsistent with the housing policy, and they've received that information from us, can we request a response back from the city on whether or not they plan to work on meeting that in the future, or what their response is in general?
Got it. Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss, for your clarification. Yes, oftentimes community, our staff are working with community staff with amendments through the process and alert them to that. So as noted in the staff report, in the housing section, I believe, or in the land use section, one section of the staff report, that council staff and city staff have talked about how future amendments would rectify this issue as a possibility. In the amendment process, which usually is development driven, this is typically how it is responded to, is through a future amendment. If we're reviewing a full comprehensive plan update, then there's often kind of a back and forth before we bringing the plan to you for your review before we get to that point, because of the broader big picture comprehensive planning process. But for amendments, it typically is development driven. So moving this forward and then finding a future amendment to rectify that if possible.
Okay, Chair, if I might.
Please.
So given that changes would be amendment driven, would that amendment be initiated by developers, the city, the council, the staff? Who would initiate that process?
Mr.
Director
Chair,
Barajas.
thank you,
please.
Mr. Chair, council members. The city could initiate a process that's entirely within their own purview to do that. They could do that through small area. They could do that through other things that they might be looking at within their comprehensive plan. And then there could be a development proposal that also changes their review or an amendment that they aren't already accounting for. So there's a number of different avenues. The only person who cannot, or the only entity who cannot initiate an amendment, is the Metropolitan Council.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss, does that answer your question?
Oh, it certainly does. Can the Metropolitan Council request a response back, even if it's not an amendment?
Director Barajas?
Mr. Chair, council members, the action that you are taking is essentially the request to rectify. We're strongly encouraging the city to become consistent with the council's housing policy and doing that in that way. So that is the method of communication that is used, is through the official actions that you take.
Perfect.
Councilmember
Well, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would think that we can add an additional request, and I'd like to hear from other council members as well, but maybe adding a request to have the city to respond to not meeting the housing portion of the policy plan.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. So I know that Councilmember Johnson is requesting the floor, so I don't know, is it on this Councilmember Johnson, or?
It is, Mr. Chair.
Please, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss, for bringing this up. I think it kind of goes like this. The city knows that by requesting this amendment, they're falling out of their numbers to meet the housing goal. They know that. And I think, to your point, my question would be back to Director Barajas, is the needs to language, the words needs to, that we have in the PowerPoint and in the memo, and I'm not sure what down deeper in the details going back to the city, but are we hearing from them that they understand that and that as future development comes forward, that they'll be working to adjust that housing number up? And the only reason I say this is, you know, as you work at a city and these amendments come to you, it might be a really great development for their community. So they understand it might throw them off on the housing, but you know, this might be a priority for them too to get this passed. So, you know, my experience would be that most cities would then keep that directive from Met Council in mind and look for those opportunities. And I don't know, Director Barajas, if that's what's happening here, but I guess my only question is in the needs to, because if they don't, then what happens? And I think that gets to, I think, what Councilmember Chambliss is asking. Or, you know, how do we really encourage and work to ensure, I guess?
Yeah, that
You,
is
Councilman.
part of it. If I may respond, Chair.
Please.
That is part of it. And, you know, they can choose to not, you know, apply for the livable community grant. And that's basically separate from responding to say, you know, we choose not to apply, or we plan to look into this, or having a final response back. What I'm requesting is having a response back from the city on, you know, not meeting the housing policy plan.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Oh, sir, you're muted.
There we go. I do apologize. I've been on so many different meeting platforms today, and they sort of interfere with each other. Was that Mr. Benner? Is that who asked for the floor?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Councilmember,
Yep.
you know, I want to say thank you for your concerns regarding, you know, next steps and what the kind of procedures work. You know, I do want to say that myself and other staff have been working very closely with Mr. Hart from the City of Forest Lake, planning out different scenarios to see, you know, how we can bring them back into consistency with housing policy. As one of the council members mentioned, you know, this can be a very important project or development for a city. So it is, I think the city is kind of weighing out all their options to see what is best. And I think this is something they would like to move forward with. As I think this is a project they've been working on since the summer along with the developer. And so, you know, along with another staffer in the local planning and assistance work unit, we have found some ways that we can, and some great solutions to bring the plan back into consistency. With another amendment, kind of repackaging, another amendment along with another development that'd be coming through. So there are options and then that are in the works.
Thank you, Mr. Benner. Maybe I will turn to Director Barajas as well, just to sort of further explanation on both Councilmember Johnson and Chambliss's point about what are the consequences. So we take an action with a finding that we state is inconsistent. We state in our action that they needs to increase, and then what? What are the consequences of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a really good question, and thanks for pointing that out. And I would note in our proposed action that we are advising the city that to be consistent with housing policy, they would need to do these things. The proposed action isn't to require them to make those changes because policy consistency is something that the city gets to decide. They can decide to be inconsistent with our policies. So the ramifications of that, I should say, so long as they're not impacts to a regional system. The ramifications of inconsistency with housing policy is the carrot that we have of Livable Communities Act program. So that's why you see that as a proposed action, that they would be ineligible to participate in those LCA programs. And then just to add on to Jerome's point that once the plan is found to be consistent with that housing policy, then we would also find in a proposed action on that, then that they would be they would be eligible to participate in Livable Communities Act programs again.
Right. So that's more of a carrot than a stick here, right? So did that go to answering your questions, council members, Councilmember Chambliss?
Yeah, it does, especially since they're still in discussion about it. It would be nice for the council members to get an update on how that's working, and that we're very interested in that.
Great. Thank you. And I really appreciate, Mr. Benner, your context there and the conversations that you're having with the city of Forest Lake. And it would be good to know as we go forward, what kind of progress is being made. I will note that Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen has joined us as of 423. Who will further questions on that report?
Mr. Chair, this is Councilmember Wolf.
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf, please.
I just wanted to comment on the question. I don't think we need to make any additional inquiries beyond the normal communication with the city council or with the city. It may depend on where and how, because you've got to find a property owner that wants to cooperate with that.
Right.
And I mean, they know the rules. We're telling them what the rules are and how it's going to work, and they have to make their decision along with the property owners in the community and figure that out.
Thank you, Councilmember. I would agree with that as well. Any further discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
Vento moves approval.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Both seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any discussion, further discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted. And moving on to our next business item, and I do apologize for the late notice here, but I am recusing myself from this item. And so I would turn the chair over to the committee's vice chair, Councilmember Vento, and just to let folks know that after discussion with our in-house counsel, the decision was made that it's best that I recuse myself completely from this item. So Councilmember Vento, if you would please take the chair for the next item.
And before I accept, Mr. Chair, if you could please, because I don't have the agenda right in front of me, I apologize.
Thank you. It's item 2020-259. It's the Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development Funding Awards.
Got it. Okay. So, and who's, I still don't have it.
Oh, and I apologize. So the Livable Communities Advisory Committee Chair, Joe Emerson, is here to present, I believe, and also Stephen Klimek, Mr. Klimek.
So, Joe and Steve, thank you for being here. And if you'd proceed, please. I'll get my act together.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Stephen Klimek. Again, I'm a senior planner in Livable Communities, here to present the 2020 Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development, or LCDA TOD, Development and Funding Recommendations. I'm joined by Mayor Joe Emerson of White Bear Lake, who is the chair of the Livable Communities Advisory Committee and will be co-presenting today. I'll start by providing some background before Mayor Emerson and I present the funding recommendation. Next slide, please. And so the 2020 funding recommendation is that the Metropolitan Council award for Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development grants totaling $4,500,000 and authorizes Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the Council. Next slide. For how we've gotten to this point, applications submitted go through a two-step review process. The step one review is conducted by council staff with different subject matter expertise. Applications must score a minimum of 45 points in the step one in order to move into the step two review. And all applications met the minimum scoring requirement to move forward to that step two. And the step two review is conducted by the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, a 15-member external review committee made up of subject matter experts from 7 different areas of development. The committee reviews the applications and scores each based on TOD demonstration, catalytic value, and readiness. Applications must have a combined score of at least 75 points to be recommended for funding. Next slide, please. And the LCDA TOD grants are intended to advance the council's TOD policy, which is to promote moderate to high density development projects located within walking distance of a major transit stop that typically include a mix of uses such as housing, jobs, restaurants, shops, and entertainment. Next slide, please. And the 2020 grant funding calendar was as follows. The Fund Distribution Plan, or FDP, was adopted in February, and a notice of funding availability was issued to the LCA participating communities. For a 7th year, staff convened a team of urban designers, architects, and landscape architects to provide design and planning feedback to prospective applicants so that their proposed projects could best model transit-oriented design and livable communities principles. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the Minnesota stay-at-home order, this workshop was actually done virtually this year rather than through a live in-person session, which has been done in the past. Applications for the LCDA TOD grants were due on July 1st. We received 8 applications. The step one review by interdivisional council staff took place in July using the criteria approved by the council in the fund distribution plan. All 8 projects met that required minimum number of points to move forward to step two. And the step two was conducted by the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, which evaluated the 8 projects in the categories, again, of TOD demonstration, catalyst, and readiness. And today, the Livable Communities Advisory Committee is recommending funding for 4 of the 8 projects. The committee action today, if approved, would go before the full council on October 14th. Next slide, please. And for 2020, the council made $5 million available for the LCDA TOD program, with up to $500,000 of that available for pre-development grants between the spring and fall rounds, which leaves us with the $4.5 million for the LCDA TOD development grants. Next slide, please. And now I will turn it over to Mayor Emerson, provide the details of the 2020 funding recommendation before we share a summary of each project. Next slide, please, and Mayor Emerson.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, community. Thank you for inviting us. We had 8 projects, and we did award 4. These are the recommendations we're moving forward today. First would be the Minneapolis American Indian Center with an amount of $750,000. Second would be AGRA, which is also in Minneapolis, and they would be, we're suggesting $1,250,000. Then it would be Union Park Flats in St. Louis Park at $1.9 million. And the final one is 1619 Dayton Avenue in St. Paul with a funding recommendation of $600,000. Next slide, please.
And if we can jump back to the last slide for just a second. So the point totals from the step 1 and step 2 reviews are what's combined here in the points column to yield that final score. The recommendation is to fully fund 3 of the LCDA TOD grant requests: the Minneapolis American Indian Center expansion, Union Park Flats, and 1619 Dayton Avenue project. And this is a partial funding award based on the request for the AGRA project in Minneapolis. And if anyone was really doing the math in your business item table number 3, there was a $50,000 typo in the funding available column under the amount requested. It's shown here correctly, and the amount recommended in the funding recommendation column is correct in the business item table. Just wanted to make sure that was clear for everyone. Next slide, please. And figure 1 in your business item, the 4 projects recommended, again, are in Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, and St. Paul. The projects are located in station areas of the Blue Line LRT, High Frequency Local Bus, the Green Line LRT, and the A Line BRT. Next slide, please.
The next is the Minneapolis American Indian Center on Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. It's on the Blue Line at the Franklin Avenue station. It will support increased transit and walkability, 45 full-time employment opportunities, expanded cultural programs for underserved population. And we saw the value in the retrofit of a community destination and enhanced public space. Next slide, please.
The next project is AGRA, again in Minneapolis, along a high-frequency bus station. The project is the new construction of affordable housing along Franklin Avenue, a Seward neighborhood of South Minneapolis. It includes 175 affordable housing units, 117 of which are 2- and 3-bedroom intended for families. And the project also includes a greenhouse and growing facility to provide space for hydroponic food production, as well as stormwater management system for reuse in the hydroponic growing system. The LCAC found value in the integration of that affordable family housing and urban food production, and the award for this would support site acquisition. Next slide, please.
Next is Union Park Flats in St. Louis Park. It's on the Green Line at the Wooddale Station. It integrates 60 units of affordable supportive housing near a major transit center. The sustainability value in affordable housing meeting this SB 2030 standards, and the developer and church partnership may be replicated in other communities. Next slide, please.
And for the project in the funding recommendation is 1619 Dayton Avenue in St. Paul, along the A line, Snelling and Dayton station area. It's the new construction of 97 housing units of workforce housing on an underutilized parking lot by PAC Properties. It's an example of infill development on underutilized land, producing a greater density of housing by implementing shared and reduced parking. And this project also plans to meet the SB 2030 sustainability standards. The award will support site preparation, stormwater, and public infrastructure. Next slide, please. And the expected outcomes of the 4 total projects being recommended for LCDA TOD funding are 332 new units of housing, 269 of which will be affordable, 57 new permanent jobs, and 673 temporary jobs, an overall net tax capacity increase of $474,725, and a total of $88.6 million of private investment being leveraged, and an additional $18.3 million of public investment leveraged. Next slide, please. And to conclude, the 2020 LCDA TOD funding recommendation is that the Metropolitan Council award 4 livable communities demonstration account transit-oriented development grants totaling $4,500,000, and 2, authorize its Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the Council. And with that, Mayor Emerson and I will be happy to take any questions.
Committee members, any questions?
Chair, this is Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
Yes, Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
Thank you. You were going on with such a great clip. I didn't want to ask this individually, but so it may be a bit of a taxing question to ask. But could you share what we know about the affordable housing rates? Are we talking all 60% or 30% or 50% or a mixture? Is there a way that we could understand that related to each of the projects?
Madam Chair,
percentage of AMI. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I can follow up again with the details if I'm not getting this correctly by doing the quick glance at my spreadsheets. The Union Park Flats project in particular is an interesting example. It has both affordable and market rate units in it, but it uses income averaging to have all of the units sit below 60% AMI, which for us is the threshold where we would count a unit to be called affordable. It has units 13 units below 30%, and 29 units between 31 and 50%. Again, that's Union Park Flats in St. Louis Park. 1619 Dayton Avenue in St. Paul has 27 units under 30% AMI, 77 units between 31 and 50, and 68 units between 51 and 60. And Agra in Minneapolis has 18 units below 30% AMI, and 70 units between 31 and 50% AMI, and 87 units between 51 and 60% AMI. So there's a range in all of them, from under 30 to close to 60. Does that
Thank you.
answer
That
your
was
question?
very helpful. Yes, and I like seeing housing in the attainable range, that 30 to 50% AMI, because that's really what we're in desperate need of. Thank you.
Anyone, Council Member Cummings, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Klimek and Mayor Emerson. Nice to see you. I'm curious a little bit more about process. At what point are the projects that did not receive funding, when in the process are they notified that they did not make accepted into this grant program, and how much information is given to them about where perhaps they need to lift if they decide to reapply in the future?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember, that's a great question. We notified applicants that weren't included in this funding recommendation once the Livable Communities Advisory Committee made their final official recommendation to let them know that this was the recommendation, and as it was moving forward, they weren't currently included in it. Of course, if things were to change here or in the future, that it's not a done deal. We've offered any of our time to review the step 1 and the step 2 kind of points and feedback, particularly the kind of key comments from the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, so that they could incorporate that if the project moves forward, if it lines up with future timing on this project or other projects that city might be submitting. And some in particular, the Livable Communities Advisory Committee noted that a pre-development grant might actually be a really good thing for one of the projects. And so we offered that immediately, since that application deadline is coming up in November. So we've offered that kind of one-on-one time between staff to kind of give that debrief, provide any insight, and see if that can line up either for, again, the specific project or future projects the city might have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Can I ask, Madam Chair, may I ask a follow-up?
Yes, you may.
Okay. I'm just curious, again, just kind of learning more about the process in depth. How often does it happen, or what percentage of the time, or can you give me an idea of how often do entities reapply rather than, or get it straight out of the gate?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, that's a great question. This is my first round through, so I will give you my impression and let either Mayor Emerson or Lisa Verhaas give that more detail. We have, I think, seen some come in, 1 or 2. Sometimes they come back into the TOD program, and sometimes they might apply to the different LCDA program, or vice versa. Sometimes the projects just don't have the timing to line up again, but often the affordable housing projects do end up taking much longer, especially if they don't receive funding in a first round application with one of our programs. So we will see them come in again. Maybe 15%, 10% of the projects might come back. Mayor Emerson, Lisa, is there any?
Well, I would say, since this is only my second year, Stephen and I are practicing this. 10% would seem like a reasonable amount to me. And it's for a variety of reasons, as he said, timing, et cetera, or they come in, revamp the program, whatever. But I think the thing I would say too, the more we can get them to engage before they apply, I think for everybody concerned, it would be better if we could get them to do some pre-application, maybe make it mandatory instead of saying you can't do this, so that they have the opportunity to present the best program they can. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. You're muted, Chair Bento.
Councilmember Lee.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you for the great presentation. I had a curious question about the agri project, about the hydroponic pond. Uh, is it a subsistence farm for the residents, or will be will the products be sold to the general public? I just find it really fascinating as a model, and that we should lift up really cool projects like that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, that's a great question. My understanding from the application and what was put forward was this is incorporated in the building. It will provide programming and access to the residents in the building, particularly the families, but it will be available to the community. And I think they're looking for local partners, including a grower and local partners that could do distribution. I think there were references to both the Seward Co-op and what potential there could be for that spread across the street. And the project is really, the development model is based off of a project in New York City that they have seen successful in doing a very similar program structure. I think the team might be on if there's more specific questions you'd like to kind of get from them on any of that.
No, that's pretty good. Thank you.
Sorry, it's a rare moment when Sue Vento is muted, so I'm kind of going overtime. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, as I look at the staff report,
We've lost you, Johnson.
unmute. Okay, so I'm looking at the staff report that has, you know, the 10-page staff report that has each of the projects, you know, broken down on how the money is being spent. So a couple of things. First of all, I'm all for good things happening on these sites. So public art and, you know, I noticed some solar stuff and then the hydroponic. And so please, everyone, just take this as it's intended. Are there other partners that could be invited in to do some of that lift so that our money, I mean, we're at the end of the road on these, I get it, but are there other partners out there that might be in those spaces that could, nonprofits or other entities that could help the lift with those pieces of it so that our money can stay more towards construction and site acquisition and things like that? Just a question, not a judgment, because I think it's all cool. The other thing is, are any of these, I'm trying to understand again who the developers are on this, but is TIF being applied to any of this? Because I see in the project for the city of St. Paul, 1619 Dayton, you know, there's soil correction, you know, so the I'm just trying to, you know, my mindset on this is how do we, and I know you guys do this, but how do we make sure we're leveraging our dollars with other tools and other dollars to get the best impact we can with not enough dollars? That's where I'm trying to go on this.
Who would like to answer? Steve or Mayor Emerson or somebody from the team? Just go ahead and respond.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilmember. I believe, and I might invite the teams, if anyone is using TIF, to jump in. I'd have to look through again the details of the application, and I can follow up with you after this with the details. I believe 1619 Dayton Avenue may be using TIF. I do not believe any of the other projects are. That's one of the things we do ask.
Steve, this is Claire Van Dyke. I'm representative of the development team for AGRA, and we do anticipate using TIF. We have not applied for TIF yet. In addition to TIF, we also are leveraging the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and as we've also applied to Hennepin County, so a couple of different resources that we're looking for there.
I could jump in as well, if that's okay. This is Abby Lucen. I'm with Project for Private Living. We're working on the Park Flats project, and we also are planning to use TIF from the city of St. Louis Park. I think that it was committed after the application date of this funding, so it may not have showed up as committed, but we do have a commitment from the city on that.
Madam Chair, and thank you. I really appreciate that. So does that mean that with TIF being applied to the project post-application, that the amount that you're requesting would not be necessary because you've got, I don't know what the but-for test was on your TIF application with the city, but again, when I see things that would under law fit a TIF, submission. I love TIF as a tool, right? The but-for test, it's great. But so instead of using our dollars, is there a way to capture that increment from the city, the school, and the county to work on those things that are line itemed in the project?
Madam Chair, if I might, and then maybe let someone else jump in too.
Great.
I believe in particular for Union Park Flats and for Agra, the requests that we're getting in for, and they both include site acquisition, are both under what the total costs of acquisition are for them. And many of the other elements that Union Park Flats and others have, like public art or pieces, usually are not a kind of TIF potential expense. We have had conversations even in the LCDA program, which you'll hear from in a month, where different cities have different tests for what, if it's a blighted property or not, and if that's what qualifies it to be TIF eligible. We don't have any applications of that here, I don't think. But at the Hennepin County program, there are other funders that will support some of the other elements like photovoltaics, site acquisition, placemaking, and public art. I think they're few and far between, to be honest. And so what the Livable Communities Advisory Committee is looking for that extra and what that project is really going to bring to the community that's going to make it come alive. And often those are some of the elements that they are evaluating. And I mean, for instance, the Agra project, the Livable Communities Advisory Committee found a lot of value and some interest in that hydroponic system. They're not requesting funding for the hydroponic system. What they're really requesting funding for is that site acquisition because it's actually very early in its process. Many of our other projects are much farther along.
Madam Chair, just to follow up. So the Agra project, I mean, I guess I was looking at as an example, the 1619 Dayton Avenue project, because soil correction, that's a no-brainer in my mind, right? Some of those things. And I won't belabor this, but I think what I would like to know is, and maybe it's just me, but if there are tools like that are being used that can offset those dollars that we've got in the pot to make it either go further on the project or spill over into other projects, I'd just like to know that, because when you apply, it's a finite moment in time, and I'm sure your spreadsheet is huge, but I don't get to see that, and so I guess I'm just again trying to be mindful that there are always more worthy projects than we can fund, and whenever communities can really use those tools to help really leverage future tax capacity against those projects, especially when they're coming forward to us, I really want to see that. And affordable housing is absolutely allowed under state law, and the but-for tests are pretty clear. Maybe there's some local interpretation, but I think it's threading a thread through a very small needle because of the legislature being so particular about it. So that's just one thing going forward that from this committee, I'd like to just know that community has also put forward the tools that they've got to the best of their ability. And so when I see things that would qualify probably for TIF, I'll probably want to ask. So maybe just if there is TIF in on it, or we get TIF on it, if you can just mention what local tools were used, I'd like to see that. So thank you for putting up with me. And these are all great projects. Just want to be clear on that too.
Madam Chair, if I can add one thing, I think in some cases, the money coming from us helps them secure other financing. I mean, if other things start to fall into place, or they're applied for something and they're maybe waiting to see if they're going to get money from the Met Council. So I think what you're saying, Commissioner Johnson, is totally very important. But I think in some cases we are the impetus that gets the project moving further down the road. So that's another way to look at it too.
Yes, and Madam Chair, Mayor, first of all, Mayor, thank you for your dedicated service on many, many levels. I think you're so awesome. And I do totally acknowledge that. In fact, having been in 20 some years in government, knowing that first money in helps unlock other money for sure. But again, knowing what tools cities have, I'd love to see when they can put those tools on the table and get them working too. So thank you for everything. I appreciate your responses tonight too.
Great. Excellent. Other questions or comments?
Chair Pinto, if I may.
Yes, Councilmember Chambliss.
Vice Chair Mento, sorry. So I appreciate Judy's questions about looking at how we can maximize resources, and obviously timing is one consideration. And as the mayor said, getting funding approved by the Metropolitan Council might make it easier for them to get the remaining funding. And then the other aspect is just knowing if, the city is wanting to get additional funding, if what we're offering is not enough, or if there are other, a lot of times when you apply for funding, you get a question, are you intending to seek other funding, other eligible funding? So that information can oftentimes be useful to a funding source like the Metropolitan Council, I think.
Anyone else? Other questions, comments? Seeing and hearing no one indicating a desire to speak, is there a motion to approve the recommendations presented by Mayor Emerson and Steve?
Moved by Lee.
Moved by Lee, second?
Second by Cummings.
Second by Cummings. No further discussion. Michelle, will you take the vote, please?
Yes, Chair Vento. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion carries. Thank you both for your presentation. Thank you to the folks representing the various projects, and I will now turn the gavel over to Chair Lilligren.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento, and my apologies for just dropping that on you so last minute. I knew this item was coming, and it snuck up on me. So thank you so much for stepping in. So moving on our business agenda, item 2020-260. It's Ramsey and Washington County Parks and Trails Legacy Signature Authorization, and Nicole Clapp will present on this, please. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, Mr. Chair and committee members, as was mentioned, my name is Nicole Clapp. I'm the Senior Grants Administrator for Regional Parks and Community Development. The Finance and Admin Unit in Community Development, on behalf of Regional Parks, is requesting that the Metropolitan Council authorize the Community Development Director to execute grant agreements to pass through state fiscal year 2021 Parks and Trails Legacy funding. Agreements will go to Ramsey and Washington counties according to the formula defined in Minnesota Statute Section 85.53. Funding for these grants is provided by the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund. Funding is provided at 100% state share with no local match required, and will be used to fund 2 projects from those approved by the elected representatives of each of the Metropolitan Parks implementing agencies to support parks and trails that are part of the regional park system. The funding associated with this item was approved by the council on July 22nd through the 2020 Unified Budget Amendment, Business Item 2020-182. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Clapp. Any questions on that report or on this proposed action, committee members? Any questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve this item, please.
Lindstrom moves.
Thank you, sir. And is there a second?
Second by Lee.
Thank you, council members. Discussion on that motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingerbritsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That item is adopted. And Ms. Clapp, thanks for your work on this in your presentation. And with that, we've dispensed with our business items on the agenda today, and we'll move on to our one information item, and that's the Community Development Division 2021 to 2026 Capital Budget Program. And Ms. Augustin-Hubner is here to present. Welcome. Thanks for being here, Heather.
Welcome. Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's give it just a minute for the presentation to pop up. Okay, so Heather Augustin-Hubner, Finance Director for Community Development. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the same development schedule that we have been working on this entire year. We've got a good number of conversations yet to go. One minor note I will add is that, I had originally told you that we would be talking about the capital budget in September. We did change that to October just to better align with the overall council presentation and how budget amendments hit. So if you're wondering why the timeline shift, that was the minor change that we had. Next slide, please. So for today, we're going to provide a brief overview of the capital budget, and then I'll walk you through the Family Affordable Housing Program and the Parks proposed capital programs. Next slide, please. So thanks again for your ongoing feedback during our budget conversations. We're going to continue to use your feedback to frame our budget conversations, and I welcome ongoing feedback of how to make these presentations more helpful for all of you. I'm also happy to come back to the entire committee or have one-on-one conversations with you. So please keep providing the feedback and let us know what you're looking for. You will see nearly all of the framing bullets covered in one way or another in today's presentation, with the exception of the providing disaggregated data that just doesn't really fit with this presentation, but a lot of the work that went before and after this will include that. We're also continuing to take a really close look at our current forecasts, our future forecasts, what's going on at the legislature, what's going on at the federal level. We're monitoring your conversations you're having about 21 council targeted initiatives. So I'm just going to keep showing this slide to make sure that, kind of as a nice check for all of us that I'm talking about the right things, and to continue to provide you the opportunity to adjust these presentations if they're not quite hitting the mark for you. Next slide, please. So before we get into the program details, I just want to do a really quick refresh of some terms that I'm going to use throughout the night. Our capital program is a multi-year plan that represents authorized and planned projects. The current capital program is 2020 to 2025, and that's what you approved last year. It's a living, breathing document, and it's continually updated through our budget amendment process as we move items from the plan to the authorized. So projects move from the capital improvement plan or the CIP to the authorized capital program or ACP as funding is secured, and you all have given formal approval to proceed through budget amendments. Our capital budget represents the amount of the authorized capital program that is expected to be spent in any given year. So feel free to use this as a cheat sheet. I'll try not to use too many acronyms, but this will hopefully help give you a base for that. Next slide, please. So we're going to start talking first about council-owned housing units, and that's formally referred to as the Family Affordable Housing Program. So if you hear me talking about our housing program, this is specifically what I'm referring to. Next slide, please. So Terry Smith, the Metro HRA Director, provided a full presentation of the Family Affordable Housing Program at the September 3rd, 2019 CDC meeting. So I'm going to really provide a really brief overview of her presentation to just help you get grounded and encourage you or members of the public that may be watching this, that if they're interested to learn more about this, to review that presentation. Terry is also here on the call with us today. So if we have some detailed questions, we can reach out to Terry. So at the really highest level, we have statutory authority to develop housing units at the council. And the council acted in 1999 to establish the Family Affordable Housing Program. The council purchased 150 units, housing units, and we still operate those same units today. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights some of the major milestones for the Family Affordable Housing Program. I'm not going to read all of these, but I just really put these up here to let you know that we do have a pretty long history with this program, and it really started out of the Holman Consent Decree. So since the program inception, our housing units have been managed by a property management company, and we have funded routine maintenance, and the homes are generally in pretty good condition. Our homes are getting older, and we've been trying to move towards developing a more formal long-range asset management approach. We conducted a physical needs assessment in 2019, and that was planned to get refined in 2020 by our property management company. That wasn't possible due to COVID, so we've delayed that until social distancing isn't required anymore. We have moved ahead with creating a financial structure to assist with better financial reporting and long-term planning efforts. Seed funding for that was provided by you through the 2020 strategic initiative, and we just created the capital program in the last budget amendment. So really what you're seeing here is we've been working a lot towards the council broadly on asset management, and there's kind of two parallel tracks. We have the program planning track, and we have the financial management track. Those two things really need to work together, and we were able to continue to move forward with the financial, just setting up the underlying financial structure while we all wait for COVID to hopefully be done soon and can really dig back into a lot of the programming components of that. Next slide, please. So I thought a crosswalk might help illustrate the changes that we're trying to make. So from a client perspective, our renters aren't going to notice a difference. The homes will continue to be managed through a property management vendor. From a budget perspective, we're going to continue to budget small and routine repairs in our operating budget as we have always done. What will change is that large improvements will be programmed and tracked in our capital program. That will help us have a formal budgetary tool for long-term planning, and specific projects will be determined upon completion of our asset management work. So we are being very, actually, I got ahead of myself. Next slide, please. So our recommendation right now is to start our capital program modestly. And what that basically means is maintaining the status quo. So we already have, in the last budget amendment, we have $500,000 in our ACP, and that's funded by the general purpose levy. And our planned, or the CIP, is $600,000. That's about $100,000 a year funded by FOP program income. Now, this is our traditional funding method that we have used in the operating budget. What we're really doing is taking that exact same dollar amount and applying that to the capital program instead. So for right now, we wanted to basically maintain the status quo. And as COVID, releases its grip on all of us and we're able to get back into those homes and do more complete asset assessments, this may change over time, and we'll make sure that we come back to you with any recommended changes that we have. So the housing portion of the capital program is pretty small. So this ends my presentation, but I'd be happy to pause here and answer any questions you may have before I move to Parks and Open Space.
Thanks, Heather. Committee members, any questions on that portion of the presentation and that portion of the capital budget? Any questions? Hearing none, Heather, why don't you continue, please?
Sounds great. So the Twin Cities metropolitan area is home to next slide, please. One more, please. Thanks. So the Twin Cities metropolitan area is home to a system of regional parks and trails that are nationally renowned for their beauty, size, and variety of features. These are all things you know, but I'm never going to not take the opportunity to say it out loud in a public forum. With 56 regional parks and parks reserves totaling more than 54,000 acres, and nearly 400 miles of interconnected trails and 8 special recreation features, this system provides a wealth of opportunity for recreation, exercise, and socially distanced fun. It also preserves significant green space and wildlife habitat. The regional park system had over 63 million visits in 2019, and our system adds untold value to the livability and attractiveness of our communities. Next slide, please. There are a lot of, and I'm going to pause for 1 minute. I'm sorry, this is the working from home. I've got the sunset going in my eye, so I'm going to pause, pull a shade, and I will be right back.
Thank you, Heather.
Okay, I'm sorry for that delay. It was just getting awfully hard to see the computer screen.
You look much more comfortable now, Heather. Thank you.
All right. So there's a lot of players in the regional parks and open space system. And this graphic and the next series of graphics will walk you through at the high level the role that each plays in our capital program. I walked you through these last year, and I heard some feedback during the operating presentation that some refreshers were helpful. So I've included them again this year, and we'll look to your feedback to see if this is something that's helpful for me to repeat on an annual cycle, or everybody's solid with this, and I should just leave it out for the next year. But the state of Minnesota, the Metropolitan Council, and parks implementing agencies are all impacted by a number of pressures. These include those arrows on the outside. That's legislative action, economic and environmental factors, and regional needs and outcomes. Next slide, please. So the state of Minnesota plays several roles. For the sake of time today, we're going to focus at about that 100,000 foot level. At this level, state legislation created the Regional Parks and Open Space System, defined role and authority of the council within that system, and appropriates funding. At the state and agency commission level, agencies and commissions help execute legislation, including passing through funding or running competitive grant processes to award grant funding. We are actively monitoring COVID-related appropriation impacts. For example, our most recent legacy appropriation was reduced by about $2.6 million. Next slide, please. Under state law, so now we're going to move to the regional level at the council. So under state law, the council is charged with overseeing the acquisition and development of regional parks and trails. With broad public engagement, the council develops regional policy and standards in Thrive MSP 2040 and the Regional Parks Policy Plan. These plans address issues related to regional parks policies, plans, and grants. The Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, or MPOSC, helps the council develop a long-range plan and an acquisition and development program that includes funding for regional parks. We review Parks and Trails master plans for conformity with regional policy, ensure all projects funded in our capital program are in an approved master plan, and serve as a fiscal agent to ensure funds are expended in line with various program and funding source requirements. Next slide, please. The parks are operated by partnering cities, counties, and special districts, and each have their own governing boards. Implementing agencies lead regional park and master trail planning, including public engagement. They operate and work to acquire and develop land for regional parks and trails. They also protect and conserve natural resources to provide outdoor recreation for public enjoyment. Next slide, please. So when you put the entire system together, a capital project life cycle looks a little like this. The cycle is ongoing, but let's start with about that 1 o'clock position. All projects funded through our capital program, except for legislative earmarks, align with Thrive MSP 2040 and the Regional Parks Policy Plans adopted by the Council. These documents set the stage for project development at the regional level and are the county's primary responsibility to set regional guidelines and engage with, it's the council's primary opportunity to set regional guidelines and engage with the public. These plans also lay out engagement standards for master planning, and that happens at about the 5 o'clock position. Parks implementing agencies take the lead at about 5 o'clock. They engage with the public to develop master plans and develop specific capital projects which are prioritized and included in their agency capital improvement plans. The council also has capital improvement plans, and we develop our capital improvement plans at the program level, and I'll talk about what that means more on the next slide. Once funding is secured at about the 7 o'clock position, it is brought into the council's authorized capital program through a budget amendment at about the 8 o'clock position. Funding is then passed through to regional parks implementing agencies through grant agreements. All projects funded with the council's ACP conform to the regional park policy plan and are in an agency master plan. The cycle is rounded out through performance measurement, through things like grant monitoring, reports to the state, semi-annual reports that the agencies provide to us, and just ongoing monthly engagement with them. That takes the report of various reports and data submissions. The council, in partnership with the regional parks implementing agencies, work together to advance equitable use of the regional park system throughout this cycle. Starting with Thrive MSP 2040 and the Parks Policy Plan with setting policy expectations, moving to master planning and the equity analysis requirement, to highlighting equity efforts during the project authorization and initiation period. Next slide, please. So at the last slide, when I talked about programs, these are the general programs that I am talking about. We fund capital projects through 4 primary revenue sources. These include Legacy, Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, State of Minnesota bonds, and council bonds. We also get direct appropriations, commonly referred to as earmarks, from the state, but you will not see anything budgeted in our planned program for them. If we do get those, we'll make sure that we bring those into the authorized capital program, but we're not making any assumptions that any of those are coming our way right now. So legacy funds are appropriated by the legislature, and we forecast this funding will increase about 2% annually. 2020 is our base year at just over $20 million, and we forecast annual funding will increase to just over $22 million by 2026. I will note that this was an area that we had some conversation about because, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, our legacy dollars were, our legacy appropriation was decreased this year. We made the assumption to just take our base year as the original 2020 appropriation to the council. And what we'll just do is we figured that is the best benchmark that we've got right now. We haven't heard anything else from the state, and we'll just continue to watch appropriations and adjust accordingly. Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund dollars are awarded through a competitive process to the council. So we apply for that funding in partnership with the parks implementing agencies and the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, or LCCMR, awards the grants. We anticipate relatively stable funding at about $750,000 through ENRTF with a $500,000 in council bonds match. Now, given that these are competitive, this is really our crystal ball. There will be some years where we may get a larger grant and some years where we may get a smaller grant, and we will come to you when those circumstances happen. State of Minnesota bonds are appropriated by the legislature, and the council has traditionally requested about $15 million in bonding years. We have a policy to match $2 of council bonds to every $3 of ENRTF and state bonds. We can have up to $40 million of regional parks bonds outstanding at any given time. And our CIP also does assume that the council will continue to fund the equity grant program out of council bonds. Next slide, please. So 100% of parks funds in our capital program are passed through the following programs. The council administers regional parks grant programs that provide funds to expand, improve, and maintain the regional park system. As you can see on the graphic, 3 of our 4 grant programs are sourced through state funds, several of which are distributed by formula. You can also see that the council provides a match in 3 of the 4 grant programs and fully funds the equity grant program. Funds are passed through via grant agreements, and we currently have over 200 active grants valued at $150 million, and we're anticipating awarding about $224 million of grant funds in the next 6 years. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to lift it a level up and talk about what the highest level program looks like, and then we'll drill back down into some of these projects. So putting everything together, the capital program is $374 million. This includes both our authorized and planned spending. Uses by department. So let's go from your left to the right. So uses by department basically represents where funding will go. We know that 100% of funds will be passed through, and about 300 million of that will go to implementing agencies based upon funding formulas. That's going to be that really large $300 million green slice of that pie, and that represents legacy and bond formula allocations. We know that another $40 million will go to implementing agencies through the land acquisition program on a first come, first served basis. So we've called that out specifically. And the remaining $34 million represents legislative earmarks and the equity grant program. So let's go to that middle column, or the middle chart. Based upon history, we anticipate that about 37% of funds will be used to improve parks and trails, 36% will go to expand the system, and about 27% will be used to expand the system. So now these choices may adjust over time. And it really depends upon how implementing agencies prioritize their projects. Moving to the far right chart, the state funds 84% of the capital program, and the council's regional match makes up the balance. The council does not match direct appropriations. Again, those are commonly referred to as earmarks. Next slide, please. So while that first slide represented the total program, this slide represents the future spending. So essentially, we took that $374 million, backed out what we've already spent, and that leaves us with $285 million. So authorized funds, as I mentioned before, are passed through via grant agreements to park implementing agencies and communities identified by the legislature to receive direct appropriations. Future spending in our CIP represents planned projects to preserve, improve, and expand the regional park system. Next slide, please. So as a reminder from last year, what we do when we build our capital program is we start from the base of the previous year and really just add on an extra year. So a lot of what you're seeing in this CIP was approved in last year's budget. So what I'm going to do is call out any changes that we have made from the 2020 to 2025 CIP. So first, we anticipate the council will continue to match state of Minnesota appropriations as directed by statute or council policy, and that the council will continue to fund the equity grant program. So those are the two foundational assumptions that we've made about council funding, and that comes up, and I've rounded here, but it comes up to about $12.6 million. And I will also add one note here. We've recently been talking about programming some parks interest earnings into the equity grant program. Interest earnings are not represented here, and we're planning to bring the parks interest earnings to the council on an annual basis as part of our annual budgeting process. You as a council may decide to put that to the equity grant program, and it will go into the capital program. We just didn't put it in because we didn't want to assume how you wanted that money invested in future years. So let's look at the adjustments programmed. So really what we did is we added anticipated state revenue in legacy bonding, Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and funding the Regional Parks Equity Grant Program and the council match. So you will not see changes in previous years other than adding this last year. All right, next slide, please. So the council serves as the fiscal agent to distribute legacy and bond dollars in support of the Metropolitan Regional Park System. So as a reminder, legacy funds are allocated to each park implementing agency in according to a formula set in state statute, and bond dollars are allocated based on a formula in the Regional Parks Policy Plan. So we have about $48 million remaining to spend on currently authorized projects and $192 million that are planned. Planned dollars are budgeted at the program level, and in this case, by anticipated implementing agency share of state bonding and legacy dollars. And we have a map up here. I'm not going to read through all of the dollar amounts, but each implementing agency estimated amount is shown on this chart. Currently authorized projects include projects such as a new pavilion at Lake George Regional Park, multiple improvements to Whitetail Woods Regional Park, and public outreach projects at multiple regional parks agencies. On the plan side, you're going to see some planned bond projects, and that's assuming we're going to get some funding from the state at some point. And we also have a new list of about 50 proposed legacy projects to help maintain and improve the regional parks. 77% of the planned legacy project submissions have an equity component. That's 37 of 48 projects. Agency projects are identified and prioritized by local governing boards, and the council ensures conformity with regional policy and that projects are in a master approved plan. Proposed parks and legacy projects, including equity highlights, will go before MPOSC in November and December. And projects range from construction of trails and fishing piers to ADA improvements at existing facilities. So right now, what you're going to see in our CIP is an allocation of dollar amounts per implementing agency. And then usually, about a year or two out, we start finalizing what those projects are going to look like, review them to make sure that they are in conformity with the Regional Parks Policy Plan and Thrive MSP 2040, and we'll do equity analysis reviews, and then they'll be shared with MPOSC and then back with the council. So you won't have seen a lot of the projects in the CIP just because a lot of that work is actively happening right now, and you've already seen some of the bond projects. So next slide, please. This slide summarizes future land acquisition spending. We have about $2 million left to spend on authorized projects and plan on a $29 million in new land acquisition projects. As we discussed earlier, land acquisition projects are funded by ENRTF, Parks and Trails legacy funds, and a council match. And I don't believe I've said this before, but in the annual or in the legacy appropriations, there is a 10% set aside of the legacy dollars that are specifically programmed for land acquisition, and the council matches that 10%. ENRTF is a competitive grant process through the state. Again, so some years we hope to get the money all years, but that is certainly some years we're more successful with that than others. And again, our award may go higher, it may go lower, and we'll make sure to just stay in contact with you as those changes happen. Next slide, please. Our other category of about $14 million includes direct appropriations from the legislature and then our equity grant program. The map you see is the Lake Links Trail around White Bear Lake. Some portions of this trail are part of the regional trail network and others are local trails. The council is passing funds through to Ramsey County, Monometai, White Bear Township, and the city of White Bear Lake for this project. As CDC members are aware, we're in the middle of working with our equity grant program. Our pilot year awards have been made, and we are in the process of developing the solicitation for the next equity grant program round, and park staff will be back to talk with you again in the next couple months. And we're really excited to see what's going to be developed and what we can bring to you later this fall. And we anticipate, I believe, that those grants will actually be awarded in 2021. And next slide, please. And that ends my formal comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Heather, for that presentation. Committee members, questions on this report or the capital budget? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Heather, for this very thorough presentation. I have a question, and it's related to the equity grants and the use of the interest. You mentioned that the council can decide whether or not they want to allocate that funding, the excess interest, to the equity programs, if I understand correctly. And my question is, would we make that decision during the final budget approval process, or when would we make the decision of how we want to use that interest?
Mr. Chair, council members, so I believe the investment, so every year we're proposing that we bring our audited financials of how much interest earnings we have in the bank. And that's essentially that 1.4 million that the council acted on through a budget amendment to bring into the process for this year's equity grant program. So what I imagine would happen is we would go, let our audit get closed next year, and then we'd be able to start that conversation with you kind of mid to late summer of being able to lay out for you, this is what the interest earnings are. How would you like us to program it this year? So we could bring interest earnings in either through a budget amendment or formal council adoption, but we have already programmed essentially the dollars that they are there to program right now.
Chair.
Councilmember Chambers, yeah. I think Councilmember Chambers has another question.
Yes, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that 1.4 million, that's what we did. We had an amendment to pass that money through, that interest earnings through. And then after the audit, we would do the same thing around mid to late summer, if that's what we choose.
Chair, council members, that's correct. That the dollars that you just brought in through the budget amendment were represented in this presentation in the ACP. So we are already assumed, or that is represented as the authorized portion of this capital presentation.
And it was the additional interest.
Chair, council member, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambers. Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson, was that you? That was weighing in? Please.
I just also want to remind folks about the relationship that we have with the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. Our decisions, our role in the statute is that what we do is in partnership with the commission and the implementing agencies. So I just want to remind folks of that, that we are partners in the stewardship of these funds. And sure, it is true that if we decided to ignore their guidance and discussion, we could choose to take an action that's not in reflection, but I would argue that that's not what the state statute calls us to do. So I just want to help remind people of the uniqueness that we have a few commissions that are a part of our body officially by state statute, and this is one of them.
Thank you for that reminder, Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. Further questions or discussions on this report? Any further questions? Last chance, further questions? Hearing none, Heather, thanks so much for your work and your team. This is a ton of work. Appreciate the education. I think now that we've been through this a couple of times, it's starting to connect a lot of dots, at least for me, and I'm guessing other committee members as well. So we have no action related to this, correct? So, so thanks again, Heather, to you and your team.
Yep, thank you, Chair, council members. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to walk you through if you have any questions after tonight.
Thank you, Heather. I'm guessing people will follow up with questions. So cool. And that was the final item on our agenda, committee members. Anything before we adjourn? Director Barajas, anything?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Michelle, anything you need from us?
Oh, good, thank you.
Great. Okay, seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening. Thank